Hi folks, my name's Johnny and welcome to the Oddest. If you enjoy today's stories, please take a wee moment to tap that like button. It's a gesture that will only take a second but will help my channel grow immensely. In fact, whilst you're there, you may as well subscribe, eh? Wink, finger gun. We all hear or read stories that are so crazy and mysterious that it's hard to believe they are actually true. In today's video, we're going to check out two of these stories. So sit back, relax, and get ready for two of the oddest stories you won't believe are true. In 1978, 49-year-old Bulgarian Georgy Markov worked for the BBC in London as a writer. He would mainly write about foreign politics and had fairly open views about his personal disdain for the Bulgarian government and their regime. On the 7th of September that year, Georgy would begin his working day the same as any other. In the morning, he made his way across Waterloo Bridge, crossing the River Thames in order to catch the bus to work. When he eventually arrived at the bus stop, he noticed how busy it was. But this was standard for the London early morning rush of people ambling to get to work on time. While standing in the small crowd waiting for the bus to arrive, Georgy felt a wee nip on the back of his right thigh. A pinch that felt like a bug bite, or maybe a leg hair got caught in the fabric of his trousers. He tried to look at the back of his leg and on the ground to see if he could ascertain what type of bug it was, but he saw nothing. Thinking nothing more of it, Georgy boarded the bus that had just arrived and took his seat. Although the bug bite was a wee bit itchy, he trundled along on the bus until it arrived outside of the BBC's Broadcasting House, which is the headquarters of the British Broadcasting Corporation. He went to his office, said hello to his colleagues, and he began his day. Once Georgy took his seat, however, the pain of the sting on his leg became more intense. Although he tried for a short time to awkwardly shift in his seat, the pain didn't lessen one bit. He got up and went to the men's room where he could try and get a better look. Sure enough, on the back of his right thigh was a red welt, the size of a bug bite. But what bug is likely to pinch him on a September morning in cold London? Georgy persevered with the pain throughout his working day. By the time he got home that night, the pain had increased and he was sweating. He told his wife all about it, and after feeling his temperature, it became clear to her that he was developing a fever. They then travelled to St James Hospital in Balham, South London, where he got to speak to a doctor there. Georgy relayed the events of the morning, and he felt silly. It's most likely just an insect bite of some kind, but he was definitely feeling much worse than he was this morning. The doctor asked Georgy to pull his trousers down a wee bit to get a better look. The swelling had gotten much worse now, and as such, the doctor excused himself and shortly returned with a colleague. They both inspected the infected area, which was ballooning in size. The doctors concurred that there's really only one thing that could cause such a bite, but it made very little sense. They turned to speak to Georgy and asked him to confirm his movements of that morning. Yes, I left the house and crossed the bridge. Yes, I stood in a wee crowd waiting on my bus when I felt the pinch on my leg. No, I didn't notice anything strange at the time. What's going on? After looking at each other in confusion, his doctor would ask him a strange question. Could you have been bitten by a snake? All signs would indicate that at some point he may have been bitten by a poisonous tropical snake. Georgy was amazed at the question. Why or how could a tropical poisonous snake find its way to the bus stop on a rainy London morning? No, that made no sense. And besides, after he felt the nip on his leg, he quickly looked around and surely he would have noticed a snake. There were at least a dozen other people standing around him. Surely they would have seen such a thing also. Georgy was immediately admitted into a ward in the hospital, where doctors would try various medicines and remedies to curb the swelling. But the infection got so severe over the coming days that the swelling would just get worse, as would Georgy's fever, causing him to be delirious at times. He became so anxious, and he told the doctors that he now believed he may have been deliberately poisoned, like maybe someone was trying to kill him. They even carried out an x-ray of the area in the hopes to find more answers, but the x-ray showed nothing. 4 days after feeling this wee nip on his leg, Georgy would sadly pass away, with the medical team still stumped as to the cause of this infection. The doctor's report was received by the Metropolitan Police, and as such, due to the bizarre nature of this case and Georgy's assumptions that It may have been a deliberate poisoning. They ordered a thorough post-mortem. An autopsy was carried out and a small square sample of the infected tissue was taken from his leg, and also a matching sample was taken from the other leg for comparison. These samples were sent to a lab for further examination. What was discovered astounded doctors. They discovered a tiny metal disc measuring 1.7mm in diameter. Now, just for comparison, a pinhead is 2mm in diameter. So that gives you a wee clue as to how tiny this object was. Further analysis of the strange object under a microscope revealed this: a small spherical shape with two holes that was hollow in the middle. They found almost like a microscopic reservoir had been engineered into the wee piece of metal. Further tests revealed it contained a lethal poison called ricin. Ricin is very toxic and very deadly. This poison is so effective in killing, and the fact that it can be mistaken for other illnesses, that's what makes it such an effective tool for assassination. As Georgi was a defector from Bulgaria, and the fact that he was very vocal in the media about his hatred for the regime, it was found that it was time to silence him. An ex-Russian KGB agent, Oleg Kalagin, who was exiled to the United States back in the 90s, reported that he oversaw the program that would train these assassins. He detailed that the tiny ricin pellet would be inserted into a syringe-like delivery system that would be installed on the tip of an umbrella. The assassin would follow their target, and when an opportunity presented itself, they would simply touch the tip of the umbrella against the unsuspecting target, shooting the tiny projectile into their skin. The surface of the wee pellet was coated in a sugary substance that would dissolve whilst inside the body, releasing the poison into the system, which would take days to kill its target. By that time, the assassin would be long gone. It's reported that Bulgaria enlisted the help of the KGB to deal with Georgi Markov. On the 10th of March 1989, Mark Kilroy and his childhood friend Bradley Moore would leave university in East Texas for a long road trip to Santa Fe in New Mexico. They were doing this because they had to collect two of their other friends, Brent Martin and Bill Huddleston. After that, the four lads would be making their way back to Texas to a beautiful resort of Padre Island. It was spring break, and the four young men were ready to party. The lads would arrive shortly before midnight after a tiring journey. They just wanted to check into the hotel and get a good night's sleep. The next morning, the boys were up early, as the island was getting progressively more busy with people flocking from all over the United States for the same reason they were there, to begin the 5-week festival of spring break. It was set to be awesome. Beer companies would set up there. There would be TV cameras filming for the likes of MTV and commercials. There was even a large bank of phone booths that were installed that permitted free phone calls, so that the revellers and students could contact family and friends, and it wouldn't cost them a dime. The lads partied it up into the wee hours, chatting to girls and generally having a good time, before returning back to their hotel for the night. They were planning a trip the next day to Mexico. The next morning, the boys went over the plans for that day. They would chill for a bit, maybe have a few swallies of the old brew, and head for Mexico. On the way to Mexico, they stopped at a drive-in in Port Isabel. There they would meet a group of female students from the University of Kansas. They got to talking, and the lassies would say that they too were heading for Mexico. Arriba. The girls agreed to follow behind Moore's car from Port Isabel to Brownsville, where both groups would park their cars and head on foot across the Gateway International Bridge into Mexico. They would spend most of the night having drinks and generally enjoying themselves at Sergeant Pepper's nightclub in Matamoros before the groups went their separate ways. Mark and his friends then returned back to Padre Island the next morning, spending the day hanging out at the hotel and catching a Miss Tan Line competition. The lads would travel once more down to Brownsville, where they would park the car again and head over the bridge back into Mexico. Matamoros was way busier than it was the night before. The place was flooded with spring breakers and the occasional tourist. The boys went to a bar or two before ending up at one called London Pub. After spending a short time in the place, the group agreed it was time to head back across the border to Padre Island. After being unable to find Mark in the bar, the lads went outside and found him talking to a lassie they recognised from the Miss Tan Line competition earlier that day. as masses of people poured out of the surrounding bars and clubs. The lads found it hard to stay as a tight group as they crossed the bridge back to Brownsville. Two of the boys, Brent Martin and Bradley Moore, found their way to Gracias, which was a restaurant close to the border. There they could wait for Kilroy and Huddleston to join them. Meanwhile, just back across the bridge, Kilroy was saying goodbye to the girl that he was talking to. As Huddleston was walking towards him, he pointed towards an alleyway to indicate that he really needed to pee. He then quickly dove down the wee alleyway to relieve himself. A short minute later, Huddleston came out from the alley and Kilroy was gone. He couldn't see him anywhere. Huddleston joined the other two lads and told them that he couldn't find Kilroy. All three of them searched for hours in the surrounding areas. They checked bars and side streets. The pubs and clubs closed at 4:30 AM and the boys were still searching. After a while at it, the boys convinced themselves that Mark probably left already, maybe even with the girl that he was seen talking to, and so the lads would head back to the car across the bridge in Brownsville. Discovering that Mark wasn't even waiting for them at the car, the boys drove back to Padre in the hopes that they would find Mark there, just back at the hotel. They wouldn't. The next morning, when the boys woke up and still no Mark, they collectively decided it's time to go to the police. Once at the police station, it was clear that the police took little interest in this. As it's spring break, they get hundreds and hundreds of these missing person reports, only to find that the person appears hung over with their tail between their legs. Mark Kilroy was one of 60 people reported missing over that wee period in Matamoros alone. However, as time went on and they couldn't find him, his uncle, who worked as a customs agent, was able to get the word out, and soon there was a search team organised at the Brownsville side to work in conjunction with Mexican authorities. They suspected that Mark's disappearance may have been foul play, only because Matamoros and its surrounding areas, they weren't exactly safe for tourists and visitors. They thought that maybe he was a victim of a drug-related incident or a robbery killing. Jails and hospitals were also checked for Mark, to no avail. The key break in the case came on April 1st, 1989. Mexican federales manning a drug interdiction point saw a vehicle run the roadblock without stopping. Police pursued the vehicle, but not overtly. They kept the sirens off and merely watched to see where the driver was going. They were able to follow the truck to Santa Elena, which is a ranch just outside of Matamoros. The police traced the owner of the truck to be Serafin Garcia, the nephew of a local drug lord whose operations were based around the ranch area. They waited until they saw Garcia leaving the ranch and then they swooped in, for a wee ganders to see what they could see. They found a lot of illegal stuff, and notably a lot of cult paraphernalia. On April 9th, they returned with several other policemen, and they arrested Hernandez Garcia, his uncle Elio Rivera, other cult members, and the ranch's caretaker. While in custody, the detainees were very relaxed. They were sent to jail while the police interrogated another caretaker at the ranch. This person revealed to the police that the ranch had frequent visitors from Serafin's criminal group. The ranch's caretaker identified Mark Kilroy through a photograph and stated that he had saw him at the ranch. Yeah, the caretaker told police, I saw him, and then he pointed to a small shack at the back of the ranch. When police approached the shack, they were instantly hit with a foul odour that only got worse the closer they got. It wasn't until they got into the shack that they discovered a truly gruesome sight. When the police interrogated Garcia, he openly confessed to killing Mark Kilroy and, in fact, several more people over the past few months up at the ranch. Here's what happened the night they took Mark. Garcia and a few other cult gang members were mingling with the spring breakers in the hopes of finding another victim. They noticed Kilroy standing separate from the crowds and talking to a girl. Once the girl had left him standing there, one of the gang had signalled for Mark to come over to the truck. Once he approached, another two gang members leapt from the back and tried to bundle Mark into the truck. Mark, being a strong, feisty lad, he put up a hell of a fight and was able to fend off the baddies. He ran down one of the streets to get away, only to be cut off by another vehicle. This time, they pointed guns at him and led him to the truck, where they drove him to the ranch at Santa Elena. They bound Mark's hands and covered his head and face in duct tape and marched him up the small hill towards the shack at the rear of the ranch, where they left him overnight. Remember, there was cult stuff laying around. That's because Garcia and his fellow fucktards were part of a cult. This cult was led by another douchebag called Adolfo Constanzo. He believed that human sacrifice was the way forward, lads. Jobs? Pfft, no honest living for us. It makes total sense. Kidnap innocent folk, kill them in the most brutal way possible. And what do you get? Well, invincibility, of course. So, Constanzo had developed a wee loyal following, a nice party of douche turds to listen to his shite. They would believe that in order to be granted invincible powers from the gods, that their victims would need to die screaming and in agony. Mark Kilroy would meet his end when he bravely tried to escape from the shack, and Constanzo would deliver a fatal blow to his head with a machete. The cult members proceeded to remove his brain, which they cooked in a small pot which was found on the porch of the shack. They cut off his legs at the knee and fed a metal hook up and into his spine before burying his body in a nearby field. Mark's body was only one of 15 bodies they discovered around the shack. 5 members of the cult were tried for their crimes and were sentenced to life, whilst Constanzo, the big shitebag, was killed by assisted suicide as he had instructed a gang member to shoot him. How's that invincibility working out for you, punk? That's all the stories for today, folks. Thanks once again for taking the time to hang out with me. Take care of yourselves, and as always, keep smiling.